era where one of the mega trends that everyone here in Davos is talking about is the change as far as globalization is concerned, also how geopolitics is reshaping globalization. Friend-shoring, near-shoring, these are terms that are coming up practically in every conversation. I know you believe firmly that we should not follow the argument of China plus one. It must be an India plus one strategy that we must adopt and take forward. What does that mean exactly?
Can I take a couple of minutes?
Yes, please, please.
So, see, I believe, I just want to make this point clearly. There are 3 global transitions that are happening. This is for every country, developed or developing. First one is a digital or AI, I call it AI transition. The digital transition is a very broad term. Second is the energy transition, and the third is supply chain transition, geopolitical transition, whatever it is, all the rebalancing we are talking about. And everything else we talk is all within these 3. India is uniquely positioned in all the 3. On the digital transition, the reason we are uniquely positioned is because we've got a fantastic tech sector. We've got a huge talent pool. I mean, the number of tech graduates pass out in India is the highest and not comparable to any other country in the world. We can combine multiple countries, still they won't match the number of graduates we pass out. Third, in the last 5, 6 or a decade, we have demonstrated that we can leverage technology and do developmental projects and public delivery at scale. And this was most exemplified in the COVID handling. This has to be seen not only as a technology transition, I call it an attitude transition. What has happened in India? The mindset and attitude has changed. Every other country went for a COVID era, a Pfizer or a Moderna. India in the past would have run helter-skelter and see how to get a Pfizer or a Moderna. But in this situation, in the peak of COVID, the country had the guts to say that we will do it alone. I mean, there is something to be said about that. And that attitude, combined with the example of large-scale digital transformation projects. I mean, we built the whole app on the fly to vaccinate 1.3 billion people. We were all in a call every Monday evening, 7 to 8 o'clock. Business and government. So that's why the digital transition, we are extremely well placed. Energy transition, we are well placed because we are probably the only nation of scale where 2/3 of our growth for the next 25 years is going to come. So all our energy per capita is the lowest in the world. So it will increase. The amount of energy we are going to consume is so much, and all of this is new energy. So we are not replacing the bad energy. We are creating new energy for development. And to do this transition when there is growth, all of us who are in business know growth fixes every problem. You can have any problem. It will all be fixed by growth. I always say the priority should be, 3 priorities should be growth, growth, growth. And I think we have that opportunity to make the transition beautifully than any other nation. The third one, the question that Shirin asked, is India Plus. I think it is not about replacing somebody. The world needs resilience. Resilience has to take precedence over efficiency. Over the last 50 years, we have driven efficiency beyond belief. So now we have to go back to being effective first, then put efficiency second. So the India Plus is for India to take the lead, to build the supply chain is ecosystem. It's not one person's game. Nobody can do it alone. We need partners. We need to work with other countries. We need to work with companies, US companies, Western companies, other companies who are willing to work with you on a transparent basis. So India Plus, when I say that, I mean India takes the lead and builds this ecosystem so that we become an alternate, resilient supply chain for the world. It is not about replacing somebody.
Well, thank you for explaining what you mean by India Plus. And I think this, again, is an issue that is being debated at this point in time, that as more and more countries like India move towards creating these ecosystems, move towards creating their own supply chains, will it have an impact on inflation in the long term? But that's matter for another debate at another time. Minister Irani, let me address the issue of inclusive growth with you, because as Mr. Chandrasekaran pointed out, growth addresses many problems, but the point of inclusion also needs deliberate choices to be made. And that's what I want to understand from you. The work that's already been done, what more can we expect now on being able to create a social protection net, on being able to ensure that the widening income inequality, that gap reduces, is bridged as well?
I think if I am permitted to reflect in the eloquence of Chandra, there are 2-3 things that I would like to take forward from what he said. Firstly, what happened in the pandemic is that tenacity of tech met the audacity of administration. And that is what India has said to the rest of the world. That's it. And when you talk about inclusive growth, when you talk about social security, what the Prime Minister has done is that he has re-strategized how you look at welfare. And through his policies, and the only part that I'll differ from the eloquence of Chandra is that there is no shotgun pronouncement of outlays. There is a strategic pathway that is designated before the money is put to the number or the plan. So when I talk about social security, as you've so pronounced it, Prime Minister Modi looked at it from a social investment point of view, and that is a reorientation in governance that hasn't happened before. How did it play out? Chandra speaks about the consumption levels in Tier 4 levels of our country. How did that consumption get fueled? You have doorstep delivery of free food to 800 million people, thereby somewhere conserving their consumption capacity, and their purchasing power then gets either conserved or repurposed somewhere else. Apart from food, what you have done for 1 billion plus of your populace, and especially for those who are marginalized, those who are poor, is protect their pharmacological needs in a pandemic. You have delivered 2 billion doses of vaccine. And that is why I said that the tenacity of tech met the audacity of administration. As he said, the easiest thing for India to do would have been somewhere a victim of the compulsion of the alacrity with which the pandemic was spreading, that there would have been many pressures that a government faces that import that vaccine. And it takes a lot of political strength to withstand that pressure, and belief in the capacity of Indian industry to rise to that occasion, knowing well that in a time when global supply chains are choked or shut down, your industry has the capacity to fulfill your need domestically, and not only fulfill a need, but also ensure that jobs are kept secure. And that is what the India story is. And again, extending from what Chandra says, why do I believe in the India +1 story? You, Shireen, began this entire discussion about how globalization is getting redefined. And now when we talk about the India story, we say we now reflect the Modi ethos of human-centered globalization. That when many countries were devoid of pharmacological help, when they were struggling to get their needs of PPE suits or vaccines met, India knew that there are many countries with their back to the wall. We did not commercially exploit that urgency of many societies. We were still humane enough to supply pharmacy needs of many countries, at times at no cost, and at times at just about the cost of production. And we did it not only out of a governance plan, we did it out of an Indian plan. As Chandra said, there are many industry captains in this very room who are on call 24/7. We've told the world, especially at Davos, we never close for business. But we were at business, both of governance and manufacturing, especially when the world had shut down. And that is the potential of India that needs to be pronounced from every corner. We did not profit from your misery. We were humane in our approach. We were resilient in protecting our supply chains. And we still served a common global cause.
Well, thank you very much for that very eloquent insight into the audacity of administration and, of course, the convergence with technology. But, Mr. Vaishnaw, let me address the issue of opportunity and the roadmap ahead. One of the big things that everyone here is talking about is the PLI schemes. The government has announced and rolled out PLI schemes across 13 different sectors. There are different stages of evolution at this point in time because the dates of rollout were different. The question now is, in light of the success of the schemes that have already been rolled out, does the government feel more emboldened and confident to do more, to include more sectors under the PLI schemes? And for existing schemes, for instance, like the FAME scheme, for the benefit of our viewers who don't know, the scheme that was brought in to try and accelerate the growth of electric mobility, the sun sets on many of those schemes in the next year or so. Will the government like to continue? Because investors investing will also want predictability and a roadmap of what incentives will look like. Are we likely to see an extension of the existing subsidies? And are we also likely to see new PLI schemes and new incentives being brought in?
So PLI scheme has proved out to be very successful, both for the government as well as for the industry. In terms of government, to what Mr. Chandra said, we don't put money just like that. We do have our calculations. We do economic IRR, you do financial IRR. So it's...
No, I was not saying that. I was saying you can take the decision upfront.
Of course, so I mean, just take PLI as an example. The outlay for PLI was about 24 billion US. The additional taxes that we are going to get just from the mobile PLI is going to be of that order. So just one mobile PLI pays for the entire PLI that we have for all the sectors. Combined together, the actual tax contribution, additional incremental GST and incremental income tax is going to be significantly more than the outlay that we put for it. What has happened is PLI first brought the assembly to country, right? Over a period of time, over a period of last 1.5 years, the assembly is now going deeper and wider. Component supply chain is shifting to India. Indian homegrown companies are coming up with components as well as many critical parts of the supply chain. And that is what is very, very encouraging. That is what is really good. We believe that, for example, this iPhone 14 is made in India, right? And now quite a few parts of it, quite a few components of it are now getting made in India. So that makes a huge difference. It is adding jobs. It is creating new economic opportunities. Are we likely to do more PLIs? Yes, there are many more PLI items in the work. For example, hardware IT, for servers, for laptops, for PCs. That is another piece to be still in works. There would be, this approach has worked well, so there would be more sectors that we consider.
We have seen Apple, through its partner Foxconn, shift a large part of its manufacturing now to India, including assembling the iPad, which is now likely to take place in India as well. Is there also a recalibration in position and strategy in the context of what we heard from Chandra? And I know that just today, apparently, the government has cleared investments from 13 companies that are linked to the Apple ecosystem so that they can assemble the iPad in India. Is there also a recalibration of strategy to say it doesn't matter if the money comes in from China or anywhere else, as long as it is creating jobs in India?
Of course, we do follow the trusted supply chain concept in multiple sectors, including electronics and telecom. But what I would like to say is that people today, as Mr. Chandra said, people want effective and resilient supply chains. The cost efficiency, which was driving the entire globalization, that is no longer the sole factor. Today, supply chains have to be anti-fragile. Supply chains have to work, whatever be the magnitude of global disruption. So combine all those factors and the experience that we have had in the last few years, there would be many more supply chain partners who are looking at alternate geographies, alternate places. And India is, of course, a very important destination. There is a stability of laws. Prime Minister Modi has shifted, has deleted about 1,500 archaic laws from the statute book. About 20,000 compliances have been removed from the compliance framework that we have. And a lot more simplification is happening. the reforms that Prime Minister did in the telecom sector. Today, a telecom tower, which used to take 7-8 months for a permission, 70-80% of the cases it happens instantaneously, as in zero time. So it's like you press your enter button, make the payment, and you get your permission. It's as simple as that. So things are improving on sector after sector. There is simplification. Space has been open to private investment. There are young startups who are now launching satellites. It's a totally new story in the country. Green hydrogen hub, the hydrogen mission, which has been approved a couple of weeks back. Already we have 174 gigawatt capacity from non-fossil fuels, which is 42% of India's total energy. So it's a very consistent, multi-dimensional, very resilient, very well thought through approach towards economy.
Chandra, if I can address the issue, we talked a lot about the domestic opportunity and what that means both for domestic investors like yourselves as well as global investors. But I want to shift the focus to talk about India's export ambitions, because for us to be able to get to the kind of growth that we are talking about, whether it's 26 trillion or 30 trillion, exports will need to be a significant growth driver. Of course, the global macros are more challenging at this point in time. But what do you believe the road ahead needs to be? And I ask you this also in the context of you being in charge of the Business 20 as part of the G20, and India, of course, has taken on the presidency of the G20. How crucial will it be for India to ink more FTAs, for India to ink more bilateral agreements to really push and accelerate exports going forward?
I think exports is a huge potential. For us to really realize the full potential of the country, we need the domestic consumption continuing to fire. We need the rural to fire, urban to fire. We need the exports to fire. And our opportunities are, frankly speaking, is mind-bogglingly broad. Sector by sector, we can create huge opportunities. If you take exports, if we get the manufacturing story right, for which there are a lot of steps being taken, the government PLI, the unique opportunity of the global supply chain presenting itself for India to take the lead for the India +1 opportunity will play out in every sector. It will play in electronics. It can potentially play in semiconductors. It can play in pharmaceuticals. It can play in food. It can play in across sectors. It will play. So I think the export opportunity is huge, and it's a natural success that will come once we create the capacity. There are 2 or 3 other opportunities. What India will do in healthcare, potentially, between the government programs and the way the private sector can follow the, I call it digital, methods to no skill, low skill people to completely transform the healthcare services delivery, especially in primary care. I think we will be the example for the rest of the world, both developed and developing. If we pull it off, we have the potential to pull it off, but we are not there. We got to pull it off. The second sector, care sector, we are going to need tremendous amount of focus on the care sector. It will create so much jobs and so many adult population we are going to have, and that's going to be a huge business. And that actually using the digital technology will be again an opportunity to serve the world. You take tourism sector, we hardly get 10 million tourists. India should be at least getting 100 million tourists. And you do the math, if 100 million tourists, 1 week, $1,000 spent per day, $5,000, you do the math. That's the potential. But all that will come once the infrastructure gets developed. And the government's program and the airports, I think 26 airports are, I don't know what the number is. So many airports are coming in. And investment in rail, investment in surface transportation, shipping, all of these things will play out. So I think we should not see it as next 5 years, 10 years, but if you take the Amrit call, the 25 years, if you take the next 25 years, I think a lot is going to happen, and we are going to be fortunate to play a part and witness all of this happen. I'm very confident, but we've got to execute. We've got to execute.
Minister Irani, I want you to build on that. Some of the opportunities that Chandra spoke of, as well as some of the unrealized potential, and that gap is fairly large, and that is what the aspiration is, that we will be able to bridge that gap. On areas like healthcare, on areas like the care economy, in the context of can India actually deliver on the aspiration of becoming the workforce for the world? What next can we expect? What are the priorities?
I think that if you just take one tenet of what Chandra professed with regards to our export potential, and if, as he says, we fire off and execute from a rural perspective, what are our prospects? So let me, apart from health, dip into one very basic work ethic. We have seen in the history of our country that when you do a rural employment guarantee program, there is a work ethic which says you show up, you sign, and you'll get that money. What Prime Minister Modi did was you show up, you build capital assets for the rural infrastructure story, you get the money, and you keep showing up. We keep building that infrastructure at the grassroots, and the story goes on. Apart from health, and let me just bring your attention to a ministry called the Cooperative Affairs Ministry. The Cooperative Ministry, just a week and a half ago, pronounced 3 very ambitious plans, but as you know, Prime Minister Modi, once he announces it, he ensures that he meets the goals that have been set. What are those plans about? They are a reflection of exactly what Chandra says. How do you fire up the export potential of your agronomic society, where you're not focused only on agro-processing, but you also take it a bit earlier than that and look at pre-processing opportunities, which means what you're telling the world is in India, investment opportunities exist not only amongst the big players, but we are creating opportunities at the grassroots also. What is the work ethic apart from building capital assets that we have seen? Again, apart from health, let me give you the story of the self-help groups. Now, people would presume that this is a coalition and a congregation of 87 million women who possibly don't know how to totter around financial services. But the reality is that they are managing a credit fund worth between $32 to $35 billion every year. And they're bringing a unique skill set by becoming a part of the rural supply chain. Can we fire that up and complement it with our export potential in agriculture? Absolutely, we can. They say data is the new oil. What is the reserve that India is sitting on? If I again reflect on Chandra's healthcare potential, Ayushman Bharat services 100 million families. If there is 4 persons per family, that means just our very rudimentary health plan services 400 million Indians and services them through physical infrastructure and digital services. We are the one nation which can, if I talk about the gender perspective, while we are talking vaccines, what is that silent revolution that is happening, which can be complemented by investments from pharmaceutical companies? We've had in the past 1.5 years, over 100 million women from poor stratas of society go to a medical institution, brick and mortar, across the country, get themselves tested for cancer of the cervix and breast cancer. Unimaginable, because people presume that culturally this is not an acceptable term of conversation, especially publicly amongst Indian women. But what we have expressed is that when we have an access to a service, and when that access is also economical, we know how to use that service. So we've created that case for the world to reflect on, that as consumers, irrespective of whether you think our rural landscape has the potential or not, we have the intelligence to use the digital services or the healthcare brick and mortar services and bring about a huge churn. So when we talk about delivery of free food to 800 million people, what we never reflect on is that for the past 2.5 years, there has been a consistent administrative performance of going to the doorstep of 800 million people, which has not happened in any part of the world. That shows not only tech prowess, but it shows the human potential of India.